I stood in the grand ballroom of the California resort, my white dress shimmering under the chandeliers, feeling like I'd stepped into a fairy tale. The crowd cheered, glasses clinked, and my mother, Eleanor, sobbed into her handkerchief, her mascara streaking as she clutched my arm. My baby, you're a vision, she said, her voice thick with pride. Dan, my new husband, stood beside me, all sharp jawline and tailored suit, flashing that smile I'd fallen for 3 years ago. Summit Ridge Developments, the real estate empire my father left me, had funded this lavish wedding, and our new house in the hills waited for us, a symbol of the perfect life I thought we'd build. I was Liz, 32, CEO, wife, and for one night, the happiest woman alive. I believed I'd found my forever. God, what a fool I was. The reception blurred by in a haze of laughter and champagne. Friends toasted our future, their words painting a life of love and success. I caught Dan's eye across the room, his grin promising me the world. I thought of the late nights we'd spent planning, how he'd kiss my forehead and say, "You and me, Liz, we're unstoppable." My heart swelled. I didn't notice then how his gaze sometimes lingered elsewhere, how his laugh felt rehearsed. I was too busy dreaming, too drunk on love to see the cracks already forming. When the last guest left, we stumbled into our honeymoon suite, a five-star haven with rose petals scattered on the bed and a view of the Pacific. I was tipsy, giddy, ready to start this new chapter. I reached for Dan, my fingers grazing his arm, expecting him to pull me close. But he stepped back, his face hardening. "Not tonight, Liz," he said, his voice like a slap. "My body, my choice." I froze, the air sucked out of the room. My dress suddenly felt too tight, the petals on the bed mocking me. "What?" I managed, my voice small. He shrugged, already turning away. "I'm tired. It's been a long day." I stood there, heart pounding, trying to make sense of it. Tired? On our wedding night? I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the words stuck in my throat. Maybe it was the stress, I told myself. The wedding had been a circus, caterers, speeches, my mother's endless fussing. Dan was just overwhelmed. I forced a smile, though it felt like my face might crack. "Okay," I said, climbing into bed alone. "We've got tomorrow." But as I lay there, staring at the ceiling, a cold knot formed in my stomach. His words echoed in my head. Asterisk, my body, my choice. It wasn't just the rejection. It was the way he'd looked at me like I was a stranger intruding on his space. I pushed the thought away, clinging to the image of Dan from months ago, the man who'd proposed under the stars, promising to love me forever. I was imagining things. I had to be. The next morning, I woke to find Dan already up, scrolling through his phone, his back to me. "Morning?" I said, hoping for a reset. He grunted, not looking up. I swallowed the hurt, telling myself it was nothing. We had a lifetime to fix this. I busied myself with unpacking, folding my veil, trying to ignore the unease creeping in. The suite's opulence, the marble bathroom, the velvet curtains, felt hollow now, like a stage set for a play that had already flopped. Over breakfast, Dan was polite but distant, his eyes on his coffee, not me. I tried to spark conversation, mentioning our honeymoon plans in Hawaii. "Sounds great," he said, but his tone was flat, like he was reading a script. I bit my lip, remembering how he'd once planned a surprise weekend in Napa, how we'd laughed until dawn. Where was that Dan? I wanted to ask, but fear stopped me. What if I pushed and he pulled further away? Instead, I smiled, pretending everything was fine, even as my chest ached. Back home, the house we'd bought, a sleek, modern marvel with floor-to-ceiling windows, felt too big, too quiet. I threw myself into work at Summit Ridge, meeting with clients, approving designs, anything to distract from the growing distance. Dan was attentive in public, holding my hand at dinners, charming my mother over Sunday brunch. "You two are perfect," Eleanor gushed, oblivious to the truth. I nodded, playing the part, but inside I was unraveling. Every night I'd lie awake, replaying that moment in the suite, wondering what I'd done wrong. Was I too pushy? Not enough? I'd always been the strong one, the one who took over Dad's company at 25, who never flinched under pressure. But with Dan, I felt small, like a kid waiting for approval that never came. I thought of calling my brother Kevin for advice. He was 28, working as a project manager at Summit Ridge, always quick with a joke or a hug. But something stopped me. Kevin and Dan had grown close lately, always whispering about some work thing I wasn't part of. I didn't mind at first. Dan fitting into my family felt like a win. But now their bond gnawed at me, a vague unease I couldn't name. I pushed it down just like I pushed down Dan's rejection, telling myself I was paranoid, that love would fix this. Love had to fix this. Looking back, I see it all so clearly, the signs I ignored, the lies I told myself. That night in the suite wasn't a fluke. It was the first tear in the fabric of my life, one that would rip wide open. I thought I was building a future, but I was just a pawn in a game I didn't know I was playing. I loved Dan. God help me, I did. And that love made me blind, made me stupid. I stood on the edge of a cliff, smiling like an idiot, not realizing the ground was already crumbling beneath me. I woke up each morning hoping things would change, that Dan would look at me the way he used to, with that spark that made my heart race. But weeks after the wedding, our house felt like a museum, beautiful, cold, and full of things you couldn't touch. I'd reach for him at night, my hand hovering over his shoulder, but he'd turn away, muttering, "I'm exhausted, Liz." Or worse, he'd snap, "My body, my choice?" That same damn phrase from our wedding night, cutting me like a knife. I'd lie there, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, my chest tight, telling myself it was temporary. He was stressed, I reasoned. Running Summit Ridge was no joke, and maybe I was putting too much pressure on him to play the perfect husband. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I just didn't want to face it. Dan's excuses piled up. "Work's crazy," he'd say, or "I'm just not into the mood." Weeks turned into months, and our bed became a battlefield where I lost every night. I tried talking to him, my voice soft, careful, like I was handling glass. "Dan, is something going on? We could see a counselor, maybe?" He'd roll his eyes, his jaw tight. "You're making a big deal out of nothing, Liz. Stop overreacting." I'd nod, biting back tears, feeling like a nag, like I was the problem. Our house, with its polished floors and designer furniture, felt like a tomb, trapping me with a man who was slipping away. Then there were the little things that gnawed at me. Dan was glued to his phone, his fingers flying over the screen, a smirk tugging at his lips. When I'd walk by, he'd tilt it away or lock it with a quick flick. "Just work emails," he'd say, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. I'd catch him laughing at texts in the middle of the night, the glow of his screen lighting up his face while I pretended to sleep. He started taking drives to clear his head, disappearing for hours, coming back with vague excuses about traffic or scenic routes. Once I found a receipt for a coffee shop an hour away, dated when he said he was at the office. I held it in my hand, my stomach churning, but when I asked, he shrugged. Must have grabbed coffee on a break. I wanted to believe him, God I did. But the doubts were creeping in, like cracks spreading through glass. What made it worse was Kevin. My little brother, always the charmer with his easy grin, started showing up at our house more than usual. At first I was glad. He'd bring takeout, crack jokes, and for a moment the tension would ease. But then I noticed how he and Dan acted. They'd huddle in the kitchen, whispering, laughing in a way that felt private, exclusive. Once I walked in and saw Kevin's hand on Dan's arm, lingering a second too long. My skin prickled, but I brushed it off. They were just close, I told myself. Kevin worked at Summit Ridge, managing projects. And Dan had been spending more time at the office, saying he wanted to learn the ropes to support me. I'd actually teared up when he said that, thinking he cared about my world. What an idiot I was. But the way they moved together, the glances they shared, it started to feel wrong. I'd catch them in the living room, their heads bent close, Dan's laugh low and warm in a way it never was with me anymore. Kevin would stay late, and they'd talk about work stuff I wasn't invited to join. One night, I came home early and found them on the couch, Kevin's knee brushing Dan's, both of them jumping when I walked in. "Just catching up," Kevin said, his smile too bright. Dan nodded, but his face was flushed. I stood there, keys in hand, feeling like an outsider in my own damn house. "Everything okay, sis?" Kevin asked, his voice all concern. I nodded, forcing a smile, but my gut screamed something was off. I tried to talk myself out of it. Kevin was my brother, the kid who'd followed me around as a child, begging for ice cream. Dan was my husband, the man who'd vowed to love me. They were just bonding, right? I was being paranoid, letting my imagination run wild because Dan was distant. But the more I watched them, the more it ate at me. Dan would light up around Kevin, his eyes bright, his voice animated. While with me, he was a ghost. I started noticing how Kevin always had an excuse to visit. "Just checking on you, Liz," he'd say, but his eyes would dart to Dan. And Dan? He'd make excuses to swing by Summit Ridge, saying he was helping Kevin with a project. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but fear held me back. What if I was wrong? What if I was right? I felt like I was losing my mind. Every night I'd replay their interactions, searching for clues. Was it just friendship or something else? I hated myself for even thinking it. Kevin was my family, Dan was my husband. How could I suspect something so vile? But the signs were there, piling up like unpaid bills. I'd sit in my office at Summit Ridge, staring at blueprints, unable to focus, my mind spinning with questions I was too scared to ask. I'd built my life on trust. Trust in Dan, in Kevin, in the family we were supposed to be. But now that trust was crumbling, and I was terrified of what I'd find when it fell apart. I was alone, trapped in a house that wasn't a home, surrounded by people I wasn't sure I knew anymore. And the worst part, I still loved them both, even as they were breaking me. What a fool I was, clinging to a dream that was already dead. I sat in my office at Summit Ridge Developments, the hum of the city outside barely reaching me through the thick glass windows. Blueprints and contracts littered my desk, but my mind was elsewhere, tangled in the mess of my marriage and the gnawing suspicion that something was rotten. Dan's coldness had become a constant ache, and Kevin's frequent visits to our house left a sour taste in my mouth. I'd spent weeks telling myself I was crazy, that I was reading too much into their whispers and lingering touches. But the doubts were louder now, screaming for answers I wasn't sure I could handle. I gripped my coffee mug, the ceramic warm against my palms, and tried to focus. That's when Mike, my assistant and one of the few people I trusted at the company, knocked on the door. "Liz, you got a minute?" Mike's voice was steady, but his eyes were sharp, like he was carrying news he didn't want to deliver. I nodded, motioning him in. He closed the door behind him, a thick folder in his hand. I was going over the quarterly financials, and there's something off. My stomach dropped. Mike wasn't one to cry wolf. If he was worried, it was real. He opened the folder, sliding a spreadsheet across my desk. "There's a series of payments to a company called Apex Consulting. Big ones. Authorized by Kevin, but Dan's name is tied to them." I stared at the numbers, my heart pounding. Payments totaling over $200,000, spread out over months, all to this Apex Consulting. I'd never heard of them, and Summit Ridge didn't work with obscure firms for no reason. "What's Apex?" I asked, my voice tighter than I meant it. "Got it to be." Mike shook his head. "That's the thing, I can't find much on them. No website, no clear projects. It's like they're a shell." I leaned back, my mind racing. Dan wasn't even an employee, just my husband, occasionally poking around the office to learn the business. Why was his name on this? And Kevin, my brother, the project manager with enough clout to sign off on these sums, and what was he doing? That night, I waited for Dan to get home. He strolled in late, his tie loosened, that damn smirk on his face as he scrolled through his phone. I stood in the kitchen, the spreadsheet burning a hole in my mind. "Hey," I said, keeping my tone light. "What's Apex Consulting? Your name came up in some payments at work." His head snapped up, his eyes narrowing for a split second before he laughed, a forced, hollow sound. "Apex? Must be a mix-up. I don't know anything about that." He turned away, grabbing a beer from the fridge, but I saw it, the flicker of panic in his face. My blood ran cold. He was lying. I knew it like I knew my own name. I didn't sleep that night. My heart thumped so hard, I thought it might crack my ribs. The pieces were falling into place, and I hated the picture they were forming. Dan's distance, Kevin's sudden closeness to him, and now this. Money moving through my company, my father's legacy, with their names attached. I lay in bed, Dan's soft snores beside me, and felt like the world was closing in. Was Dan stealing from me? Was Kevin helping him? Or was it something worse, something I couldn't even name? I wanted to shake Dan awake, to scream until he told me the truth. But I knew he'd just lie again. I needed proof, something solid to hold on to before I lost my mind. The next morning, I called Mike into my office. Dig deeper, I told him, my voice low. Find out everything about Apex, Kevin, Dan, anything that doesn't add up. Mike nodded, his jaw set. I'm on it, Liz. Over the next few days, he worked quietly, pulling records, cross-checking accounts. What he found made my skin crawl. Kevin had approved multiple invoices for Apex, some for consulting services that didn't exist, others for vague project support. Worse, there were transfers to a bank account Mike traced to Dan's name, not our joint account, but one I didn't know about. My brother and my husband funneling money out of my company. My hands shook as I read the evidence, my vision blurring. This wasn't just a mistake. This was betrayal. I couldn't sit still anymore. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them from Dan's lies or Kevin's fake smiles. I found a private investigator, Paul, through a contact at the company. He was a gruff guy, all business, with a handshake like a vice. What do you need? He asked, cutting to the chase. I took a deep breath, my voice trembling. I think my husband's hiding something. Maybe my brother, too. I need to know what they're doing, where they're going, who they're meeting. Paul didn't flinch. Give me 2 weeks. I'll get you what you need. I nodded, my throat tight. Make it quick. As I drove home that night, the city lights blurred through my tears. I felt like I was drowning, caught between rage and fear. If Dan was cheating, I'd survive. I'd make him pay. But Kevin? My little brother, the one I'd protected from bullies, the one I'd brought into Summit Ridge because I trusted him? If he was part of this, it would break me. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I'd given them everything, my love, my trust, my father's company. And now they were stabbing me in the back? I had to know the truth, even if it killed me. I wasn't just fighting for my marriage or my company. I was fighting for myself, for the woman I thought I was. And I'd be damned if I let them take that from me. I woke up with a knot in my stomach, the kind that makes you feel like you're falling before you even open your eyes. Paul, the private investigator, had been digging for a week, and every day felt like a countdown to something I wasn't ready to face. Dan was still playing the part of the distracted husband, all vague excuses and forced smiles, while Kevin kept showing up at our house, acting like everything was normal. I played along, nodding at their jokes, pouring wine, but inside, I was screaming. The financial records Mike uncovered, those payments to Apex Consulting, tied to Dan and approved by Kevin, were like a ticking bomb. I needed proof, something undeniable to confront the betrayal I could feel in my bones. That Sunday, Dan said he was going golfing with some buddies. Need to clear my head, he muttered, grabbing his keys. I smiled, said, have fun. But the second he left, I grabbed my car keys. I wasn't sure what I was doing, but I couldn't sit still, couldn't keep pretending. I followed him, keeping my distance, my heart pounding as I trailed his sleek black sedan through the city. He didn't head to the golf course. Instead, he drove to a quiet park on the outskirts, all winding paths and hidden benches. I parked far enough away to stay unseen, my hands shaking as I watched him get out. Then, I saw Kevin. My brother, striding toward Dan, his face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. They met under a cluster of trees, and before I could process it, they were kissing. Fierce, desperate, like they'd been starving for each other. My husband and my brother, tangled together in broad daylight, oblivious to the world. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. My phone was in my hand before I knew it, snapping photos, recording video, each click like a stab to my chest. I was trembling, tears blurring my vision, but I kept going. I needed this, needed proof that the life I'd built was a lie. When they finally pulled apart, laughing, hands lingering, I sank back in my seat, my heart shattered. I wanted to die right there to let the pain swallow me whole. But I didn't. I couldn't. I drove home in a daze, the images burned into my mind. Dan and Kevin, lovers, betraying me in the worst way possible. It wasn't just an affair, it was a double betrayal. A knife twisted by the two people I trusted most. I locked myself in my office, replaying the video, each frame like a fresh wound. But the pain was fuel now, turning my grief into rage. They thought they could play me, steal from me, lie to my face? No, I was done being the fool. I called David, a lawyer I'd met through Summit Ridge, known for being ruthless in court. "I need to see you, now," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. David met me that afternoon, his office all polished wood and sharp angles. I laid it out, Dan's rejection, Kevin's involvement, the Apex consulting scam, and the video. David didn't flinch. "We can file for an annulment," he said. "Prove Dan married you under false pretenses, like hiding his relationship with Kevin to gain access to your company. It's fraud. He'll get nothing." I nodded, my jaw tight. "Do it." With Mike and Paul, I built a case that was airtight. Paul tracked Dan and Kevin's movements, pulling GPS data showing their secret meetups. Mike dug up more financial records, text messages between Dan and Kevin planning to siphon money through Apex, even joking about how I'd never notice. Every piece of evidence was a gut punch, but I kept going, fueled by fury. I recorded Dan's lies during dinners, his casual dismissals when I asked about work. By the time we were done, I had a mountain of proof: photos, videos, texts, bank records, voice memos. It was enough to bury them. The court date came fast. I sat in the courtroom, my hands clasped so tightly my nails drew blood. Dan was across the room, his face pale, his lawyer whispering furiously. He'd tried to play the victim at home, swearing it was a misunderstanding, but I'd shut him down. "Save it for the judge," I'd said, walking away. Now his lawyer spun a story about me being cold, neglectful, driving him to stray. I wanted to scream, but David was ready. He presented our evidence like a general laying out a battle plan: the video of Dan and Kevin, the financial records, the texts outlining their scheme. The judge's face hardened as David played a recording of Dan laughing about keeping Liz in the dark. Dan's lawyer stammered, but it was over. The judge granted the annulment, declaring our marriage void. Dan got nothing: no house, no company, no piece of me. He stormed out, his eyes blazing, but I didn't care. For the first time in months, I felt light, like I could breathe again. I walked out of the courthouse, the sun warm on my face, and let the tears come. Not for Dan, not for Kevin, but for the woman I'd been. The one who'd trusted them, loved them, built a life around them. They'd tried to destroy me, but I'd fought back. I'd lost my husband, my brother, my illusions, but I'd gained something too. The truth. Sharp and painful, but mine. I wasn't broken. I was free, and I'd make damn sure they paid for what they'd done. The courthouse steps were still warm under my feet as I walked away, the annulment papers clutched in my hand like a shield. I'd won, stripped Dan of everything: our marriage, his claim to Summit Ridge, his lies. But victory didn't feel like I'd imagined. My heart was raw, hollowed out by the double betrayal of my husband and my brother. Kevin's face in that park, laughing with Dan, haunted me, a wound that wouldn't close. I thought the fight was over, but the war was just beginning. They weren't done with me yet. Dan and Kevin didn't slink away quietly. Within days, my phone buzzed with notifications, posts on X, snide comments on local forums, even a few anonymous blogs painting me as the villain. Dan spun a sob story about being trapped in a loveless marriage, claiming I'd pushed him away with my obsession with work. Kevin, my own flesh and blood, backed him up, posting about how I'd torn our family apart over a misunderstanding. I scrolled through their lies, my hands shaking, rage boiling in my chest. They'd cheated, stolen, betrayed me, and now they were playing the victims? I wanted to scream, to burn their world down, but I knew better. I'd beaten them in court with evidence, not emotion. I'd do it again. I sat down with Mike, who'd become more than just an assistant through this mess. His steady presence was a lifeline, his belief in me a reminder I wasn't alone. "We need to shut this down," I said, my voice hard. Mike nodded, pulling up his laptop. I drafted a statement for LinkedIn, professional but brutal, laying out the truth. The annulment, the financial fraud, the affair. I attached the court's ruling and a redacted version of the evidence, texts, bank records, enough to prove their scheme without giving them ammunition to twist. "This is my story," I wrote. "I trusted them, and they betrayed me. I'm not the villain here." I hit post, my heart pounding, and waited. The response was slow at first, then a flood. Colleagues shared my post, clients called to offer support, even strangers on X started tearing into Dan and Kevin's lies. "Disgusting," one comment read. "They tried to ruin her and got caught." Friends who'd stayed silent during the drama reached out, apologizing for not seeing through the facade. Dan and Kevin's post lost traction, their followers dwindling as the truth spread. I didn't gloat, didn't need to. The world was seeing them for what they were, and that was enough. But my mother, Eleanor, was a different story. She called me the day after my post went viral, her voice trembling. "Liz, how could you do this to Kevin? He's your brother." I gripped the phone and my jaw tight. She'd seen the evidence, knew about the affair, the money, everything, but she was still defending him. "He's sorry, Liz. Come to dinner. Let's talk this out." I almost laughed. Sorry? Kevin wasn't sorry. He was cornered. Against my better judgment, I agreed, hoping maybe, just maybe, I could salvage something from the wreckage of our family. The dinner was a disaster. Eleanor had set the table like it was Thanksgiving, all candles and linen napkins. As if a roast could fix this. Kevin sat across from me, his eyes down, playing the remorseful son. "I messed up, Liz," he said, his voice soft. "I never meant to hurt you." I stared at him, waiting for the catch, and there it was, a smirk, barely hidden, as he added, "But you didn't exactly make it easy to talk to you." I saw red. He wasn't apologizing. He was blaming me, twisting the knife one last time. I stood, my chair scraping the floor, and looked him dead in the eye. "You're not my brother," I said, my voice cold. "You're nothing to me." I pulled off my wedding ring, the one I'd kept out of habit, and dropped it on the table. "Keep it," I told Eleanor, who was sobbing, begging me to stay. I walked out, the door slamming behind me, and didn't look back. After that, I threw myself into rebuilding. Summit Ridge had taken a hit. Clients had whispered, competitors had circled, but I wasn't letting it fall. I launched a new community project, affordable housing that got the city buzzing. The press ate it up, calling me a visionary, in headlines that drowned out Dan and Kevin's noise. Mike was there every step, crunching numbers, cracking jokes, making me laugh for the first time in months. One night, over late-night coffee in the office, he looked at me, his eyes soft, and said, "You're stronger than anyone I know, Liz." My heart skipped, a warmth I hadn't felt in years creeping in. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something real, something honest. I smiled, letting myself hope. I learned to let go, piece by piece. The house, once a symbol of my dreams, was sold. I didn't need its ghosts. I moved into a smaller place, all light and open space where I could breathe. Summit Ridge thrived, and so did I. The pain of Dan and Kevin's betrayal didn't vanish, but it faded, like a bruise healing over time. I didn't need them, didn't need Eleanor's guilt trips or anyone who chose lies over me. I had myself, my work, Mike's quiet support, and a future I was building on my terms. Life had knocked me down, but I'd stood up, dusted off the dirt, and kept walking. And for the first time, I knew I'd be okay. No, better than okay. I was free, and I was enough.